So good afternoon. I'm so excited to welcome you to our wrap session. My name is Angela Taylor, and I work full-time as an AP teacher at Science Hill High School and part-time for AP Access for All, the event sponsor for today. As I was preparing this presentation, I discovered several solid suggestions that I could add to my classroom. And I thought that was interesting. Sometimes we forget as veteran teachers that there's still learning moments we can still reshape. And I hope that you'll be able to find some point in this presentation, some little tidbit of information that you can take back with you and improve your teaching, assessment, and planning. So let's jump right into it. Except now I can't move my slides. There we go. So rigor, is it a buzzword or a teaching practice? You know, I think you can, from the slide I'm showing, you can see, there's a lot of discussion about it. Productive learning, to what end? If you're like me, whether you're new or a veteran teacher, you've probably heard the term rigor multiple times. And I'm pretty sure you might have rolled your eyes a couple of times at that in some of the ways it's been used. And I can't, but I want to emphasize that it's really more than a buzzword. It really is something we need, a teaching practice that we need to integrate into our own classroom planning and assessment and critically in our teaching. So let's look at some of the ideas surrounding, these are some of the suggestions that I saw online. Some people I interacted with gave these when I asked their definitions of rigor. This is what they came up with. So you can see on the screen, probably some of these are ideas you might have heard, or that if you were asked to define. Lots of times people say it's academically demanding. It's challenging student thinking in new and interesting ways. But we have to be careful because, first of all, it's a hard term to find any actual research with one specific definition. But when you look at the research, you find some of these ideas showing right here, engaging concepts with requiring deep thought, are actual portions of it, but others are not. There's this idea that fast-paced instruction, that you have to move at a higher rate, that you have to get to the end of that AP unit number 8. We have to be careful. Rigor is not about the pace. And even the one that says academically demanding, I guess that begs the question, what do you consider, how do you define demanding, right? So as we explore this term, I really want us to try and nail down a few key components of rigor that we can, and ways we can establish that in our classroom. So in the research that I delved into over the last several weeks, there were two, I think, standout definitions. The first research that I looked at was a study of the first research I looked at was research 2, which was a study of 4 high schools in Texas. And it was trying to determine why some schools were more effective in rigor than others, and how that, and these 4 schools were very much the same in population and economics and background, but 2 were very high performing and 2 were not. So I'm definitely going to delve into that. They defined rigor as learning meaningful content with higher order thinking at the appropriate level of expectation in a given context. So I think that's the one I probably would lean toward the most. If I had given a definition, I would have talked about higher order thinking. But the other research piece there at the top was a study where they spent many months monitoring math and science and English teachers in the classroom and their interactions with students. And so they viewed rigor as an emergent property of discursive classroom interactions rather than a predetermined quality of instructional activities. And I think that's really what I want to highlight today, that we need, I think sometimes we feel we have some misconceptions, and students have some misconceptions about rigor. Let's look at the student misconception first, and then we'll look at the teacher misconceptions, and then I'm going to try and clear that up for us. So student perception of rigor is not accurate. In every study I surveyed, students connected rigor with how difficult a course was to pass. It had no relation to what they learned in the class. There was very little relation to student learning gains. Students believed that the amount of work, not the quality of assignments, constituted rigor. Neither is true. Neither is true. It turns out that you've probably heard it before. One of your students has said your class is hard. Well, the next time one of my students says that, I'm going to ask some more pertinent questions. Because was it hard because it was hard to make an A, or was it hard because of the level of thinking required? We want to be sure that our students understand that rigor doesn't have to be, it was too difficult to make an A, and that made that rigorous. We have to connect rigor with the type of thinking we do, and with learning gains, not with how students perceive it. So teacher perception of rigor isn't accurate either. When the term first came about in my realm, the rigor was defined by the text complexity. I teach AP Lang and AP Seminar. So that was defined by how high a lexile a particular text had. That's not rigor. That's a part of rigor, selecting the right components, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a high lexile or the most difficult proof for any of those kinds of activities. Rigor comes from what students do. It's measured in the depth of their understanding, right? The other major misconception that we see in teachers is, let's just pile on the homework. If a teacher's thinking is the more rigor we have, the more assignments you give, the more homework assignments, the harder you work them in class in terms of just assignment work, is rigor. That's not the case either. It's not pile on tons of activities and assignments, and it's not push them down. It's not shove everything together. It's the result of work that challenges students' thinking, and really it challenges it in my understanding of it in a new and sophisticated kind of way. We have to understand it's what students do, and it's how much they understand it.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I went off. Okay, and so let's talk about what it really is. So in the study, Reaching for Rigor, the evaluators found one predominant element of the two high achieving schools. And this might sound like, oh, I've heard this before, but I don't know whether we have in this format. Their overarching idea, their final conclusion, was that high achieving schools, establish practices that help students take responsibility and ownership of their own academic success. And just talking about that, ownership and responsibility for their own academic success. If your school promotes that idea and establishes these kinds of practices, which we'll talk about in a moment, these schools in the study saw huge academic gains. They saw huge academic gains. A large focus on this study focused on the overall school climate. And these are things I think most teachers understand, but I thought it was valuable to still go over these one more time to make sure that we are doing these things in our schools. So the two high attaining schools who ranked high on lessons with rigor offered strong school climate where all the staff encouraged high level academic achievement. It wasn't just the AP teachers, it was all of the staff. There was this sense when you read the review, they surveyed the teachers and they surveyed the students and they surveyed the administration. And when you read their responses, what you saw in the high level schools was that everyone was equally felt and encourage students at all levels to set the bar rather high. They didn't have to be in an AP class. So this overwhelming sense, there was this push that students would do something after high school, whether that was a vocational school or whether that might be a four-year college. There were academic supports in place. And when they talked about academic supports, what they meant were things like before and after school tutoring in your math subjects, ACT and SAT supporting, free after school study workshops, things of that thing. Now, trust was an issue here too. In these two schools in Texas that did better than their comrade schools, the two other schools I surveyed, there was definitely this sense that students felt valued and that there was a high level of respect in every classroom for student dialogue. And that sounds like an easy thing to achieve, but you have to listen. And it's the way you speak and address students after they've offered an answer to a question, which I'm going to show you both poor samples of that and strong samples of that. So that's the next slide. And this is really the key in another study, that the architecture of the lesson mattered. Teachers and students who were engaging in rigor and responsiveness turned potentially trivial episodes, like, that warm up everybody's got on the PowerPoint or the Google slide when the kids come in the room, into robust learning experiences. The example they gave was a science classroom where the teacher had a picture of some object in space. And the question, she really just let the students talk about the picture. It wasn't a concept she had yet explored. And in fact, she was trying to teach two separate concepts. But the point of the lesson the connection was that the warm-up went right into kids talking to each other, trying to figure out what was being shown and how it was happening before she ever had to say anything. And that led to strong table groups in the next small groupings that also continued to explore the ideas way before she ever gives what she believes to be, or gets them to come all together and figure out what the concept really means. So, the connection of each element of the lesson is directly connected to the rigor, and how teachers respond to students is directly connected. So you're probably asking, what does that look like? What does responsiveness look like? Okay. Before I even get to that slide about the poor and the best, high levels of rigor, this second study determined, could not be attained where teachers were unresponsive to student ideas and puzzlement. If that one kid looked like he was quizzical, but he didn't say anything and you didn't ask anything, or he said something and you sort of blew it off, we'll talk about that later, or you can see me after class, or we're getting to that isn't going to achieve the type of rigor that isn't going to achieve rigor at all, according to the study. How we behave in response is really how we develop rigor. So some poor examples, and believe me, I've done these. So to some degree, I think this was definitely this is a teaching moment for me as well. We're having a discussion, or you're finishing a direct instruction, and you say, let's share our ideas. Or does anyone have something to add? That isn't going to bring about critical thinking, not on the surface. And the thing about those types of questions or statements is that more than likely, you're going to have the same 3 students who answer every question, and the students who never answer aren't going to say a word. Or maybe you're the teacher who only acknowledges specific correct answers. So you've asked the question and 3 people have responded, but the only person you go back to is the one that you think was closest to the answer you were expecting, and you ignore the other 2 students' responses. It's really important that you try to connect or address every student response, and if you can, ask students to explain their reasoning to the other in the whole class setting, or keep asking questions about that to try and connect it. I thought one of my weak areas here, I tend to fill in the gaps. And that happens when, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, a student struggling to articulate the answer. If they're really close, they're on the cusp of giving something major, and yet they stop and you fill in the answer. Or they've given a partial response, and instead of asking more questions to try, like, can you clarify that for me? Can you give me any more evidence of why you made that choice? Instead of asking more questions to try and get the student to critically think about their response and their answer, you just go ahead and jump in and fill it in. Well, this was right, but you missed this part, so let's talk about that. And the teacher ends up doing the thinking in the room. We have to allow students time, and we have to be patient to allow students time to really think about their answers and why they're asking it. That's something I have to really work on. I talk super fast. And I tend to feel pressure, as I'm sure most AP teachers feel, to get through the material. But that kind of pressure we sort of have to ignore, because if you don't get to that night's homework assignment, that's okay. If the reason you didn't get there is because you were facilitating critical thinking among your students, then that is a stronger component than if they do that 10-question homework assignment. So what does good teaching look like? So what is strong teacher questioning and responsiveness? I don't mean good teaching, but good teacher questioning and responsiveness. As I mentioned earlier, ask students to clarify their initial responses. I do this really pretty often in one of my AP classes, because I keep asking, explain, clarify, elaborate. Can you elaborate on that? Or I absolutely, if multiple students are talking together, I try to tie their responses together to get them to talk to one another within the group and defend their answers. So today I was thinking about this study, and my students were analyzing, they were looking for patterns on an ACT English practice test. I'm a big believer that you have to work this test out and show students where the patterns are. But this time around, and normally that's what I would have done, I would have told them exactly, these are all the questions that deal with transitions, and these are all the questions that deal with this. I didn't do that today. I put them in small groups. They had a captain, and I'm walking around. When I hear this group debating whether or not a question belongs in the transitions column or whether it belongs in the concise word choice column, my gut instinct, so they raised their hand and they asked me to give my input. Without having this research, I would have probably quickly said, I think it goes in transitions, right? But I paused and I said, let's think about this. And because the whole class had the same test, I asked for a moment and I had all the class turn to that question. So then I stopped talking. I asked the team that was having the debate to explain their rationale for why it should go in each column. Then 7 other students in the class weighed in other groups, 7 other students, and they explained their rationale for why they supported one frame from the other. And in the end, the group decided that it could go in both. It had components of both categories. It had the transition idea, but in the answer choices, it had different wording for conciseness in each of the choice answers. So honestly, they did a better job than me just saying, okay, it should go in transitions. Because once I heard their rationale, I was completely convinced that they were correct. And that's the kind of thinking. But let's think back to this. Had I just told that student, yes, it goes in transitions, it's the end of the story. No one else in the room gets any kind of input or rationale. And there's no critically thinking about it besides in that group. And they would have taken whatever I said as the truth. But the reality is sometimes we there aren't always exact answers, or even if there are, there's ways to get to them in different ways. So I hope that's something that we're going to keep in mind. Okay, so let me go back here just a minute. So are there any questions about responsiveness or teacher responses? Have you ever heard that before? I had never heard the term teacher responsiveness. And it's definitely going to impact my own teaching in the room. It did today, and it's going to keep impacting it. It's going to keep impacting it. So let's move on. Now, I know we've all seen this. We've all had this experience. The student studies, they've practiced. They're very confident in the test. They get it back, and on the test are these comments: questions unclear, poorly worded, not on topic, exam mark, fail. Okay, this is the point. We don't want any of our students to ever feel this kind of frustration. And in order to help our AP students, we really need to thoroughly understand what is being assessed and how it's being assessed, how that's happening. I kid around. I kid around with my administrators at my school all the time. If you had to take, if I gave them the test, I think they would understand. They would have more appreciation for what AP teachers do and the content and the stress that students are under. I think they would have more appreciation of that. So let's talk about what's the first step when you're talking about assessment. You're an AP teacher. You need to study examples of actual AP exams. If you joined me in November, I went over how to locate those exams. All AP teachers have access to the restricted section you can actually garner some of the less restrictive exams in AP Classroom, but all of us have that and a link from AP Central. If you need help trying to locate where to find restricted exams that you could print and give, please let me know. All right, please let me know. Send me an email. We'll set up a Zoom and work that out. But I actually think you should go one step further. You should take the exam. In my actual training for seminar, for laying, our instructor, it was in person before COVID, our instructor made us take the writing portion, 2 hours, 15 minutes, and 3 essays. And I have to tell you that in a room filled with 30 teachers, you could see our level of anxiety increase tenfold. We were scared to death. And this was, I think we were a little unprepared. We had learned all week about these exams, but writing them was a totally different tactic. We felt the pressure of the time, just like we were the students. So if you haven't taken your own assessment, I'd try it. I would try it. I would take it. I would score it. I would see. You need to sort of feel what that's like, and you need to understand it in a really clear way. For example, I usually take at least a portion of the multiple choice test with my students, and then we go back up. I actually admit, okay, I missed question number 6. Now let's go over and see what, let's talk about it. Who got it right? Let's talk about, I need to go back and reassess why I missed that. So it's okay to look occasionally like we're fallible. We are. Okay. It's okay to show that kind of vulnerability occasionally. I actually think students appreciate that. So you can find a quick resource is this page that you're seeing a screenshot of now. It's called How Student Learning is Assessed on the AP Exam. This is available on AP Central for every course that that College Board offers in the AP realm. All the CEDs contain a page toward the end of this, like this one, if this one is for history. I'm just looking at the history one. And when my research in this arena, I found that most of the time this was 1 page, no more than 2 pages printed. I actually would print this immediately. I would go over it. I would keep it in visibly on my desk. And every time after every lesson, I would go back to this handout and say, okay, which one of these skills did today's lesson address? Make sure you're staying focused on what is going to be assessed in the exam, because our main goal is to help students meet a qualifying score on the particular AP exam they're taking. Of course, there are underlying goals, but for sure, that's the main goal. And I always tell students that at the very beginning so that they can understand that I'm in this with them. So the other suggestion I have is that I would work with the tools College Board gives AP teachers, in AP Classroom, the topic questions and the progress checks. These assessments are formatted by skill sets and provide immediate results. You don't have to grade them. I mean, the grade comes to you. So however, these can't be given numerical grades for correctness. I want to be clear. College Board does these. These are intended for remediation. They're intended for teachers also, just to see how far a group is comprehending the information. You could offer bonus points or completion points, but you don't have to. You shouldn't use any numerical grades. Let me go back just one more moment. The other thing that College Board suggests is that every time you give an assessment in your classroom, it should be in the same format as the assessment is going to be by the College Board at the end of during May. So start thinking about that. When you create an assessment, think about how you can test those skills, but make it look and in the same format as whatever your current exam is. Okay, so some assessment tips. The research says very clearly, and we've heard it, I'm sure, you have to have you have to convey clear expectations and the outcomes to students. I do this through modeling. I rarely give an assignment that I either haven't done myself or that I don't have a sample, or that I show it to them when we go over it, and I want them to be I'm very specific about what I want them to accomplish. The next thing is, don't grade everything. Students need practice. They don't need constant grades. Everything doesn't have to be graded. I tell my students that we may have 4 assignments, may have 4 short homework assignments during the week. And during that week, I might grade one of them. Now, I don't tell them which one it's going to be. So they have to understand that if we wrote 3 times, one of those essays is getting graded. Now, some weeks I might give them a choice. If I had 4 assignments, I can pull out those 4 assignments, go through on Canvas. Which assignment do you want me to grade today for this week? Okay, you can't grade everything, and if you do, it's going to make your life pretty miserable. So try and understand and just explain it to your students that they need to practice. Now, the other suggestion that I found, and I do this frequently, grade an assignment for a specific skill, not the total work product. For example, if you're using the rubric for your DBQ, maybe you're only looking at one component on the rubric in that particular writing assignment. Don't try and mark the rest of it. Just grade for that specific rubric line. This will save a lot of time, and you can get through the rubric pretty quickly, and it makes students also pay more attention. If you say, I'm only going to grade this rubric line on this assignment, then they know that's what they're looking at, and they need to up their game on that one, on that particular skill. There was a lot of discussion in the research about corrections, test corrections with explanations. I have to be honest, it's not something that I normally do a lot of. I'm going to try and change that, because the research seemed to suggest that test corrections with explanation wasn't a waste of time. It really does help students to go back. Now, if I have a student struggling on the multiple choice section of my AP exam, I do sit down with them when we go over the questions and that kind of thing. But this, again, that's me being the thinker, right? Whereas if I tell students they can make test corrections with explanations, again, that's about their critical thinking. They have to go back and figure out why that question was wrong and explain why they chose that answer and why the next choice is important. Keep track of the time you spend grading. I sort of rolled my eyes at this one until I read what the researcher said. And then I thought, I'm going to start keeping track. Because I actually showed this slide to a colleague and she was like, what difference would that make? This is the difference. If you're spending the same amount of time grading a 10-point assignment as you do grading a 50-point assignment, then you need to rethink your grading. Additionally, if you spend more time grading student work than they spent doing it, that might also be an area you want to rethink. And if you keep track of the time, I think most of us don't do that. You know, we take our papers everywhere we go. We take our math problem sets or whatever it might be. We take those with us to the track meet. And when our child's not running, we're grading. We're not keeping really good track of the time we spend. So I'm going to focus in on that for myself, and I highly suggest you do that. Of course, you should have procedures in place for student complaints about grades. I think that's a written complaint. They want to haggle over a grade. They need to explain their rationale behind why they believe they deserve something better. They don't need to do that in a verbal sense. I think they write it down. You have time to read it and think about it and determine what you want to do before you have the conference with the student. So think about that. If you don't have any procedures, AP students can be students who are thinking about just the grade. So you need to think that. And in the research, it actually talked about rethinking your assessments. Instead of 10 problems that are of similar nature, maybe the calculus teacher offers 2 problems, okay? And they're radically different. And they're going to take high levels of critical thinking. And now they've introduced the basic concepts, but it's still going to be, it's only 2 proofs or 2 problems you have to look at instead of 10. And it would create some interesting discussion the next day. So if you want to share a tip on how to handle grading, please post that suggestion in the chat box. I know there are great tips out there. I'm confident that people have those, and we'll be keeping a list, and I'll be sharing some of them at my next wrap session. So that brings us to planning. And I know some of you are thinking, why did she leave planning last? And I'm asking the question on the screen now, how do you begin your planning for the semester or year? And I know if you're like me, that planning starts as soon as you receive your schedule for the fall. In my case, that happens the last 2 weeks of the spring. And so I have all summer to determine the planning. People give us a bad rap saying we don't work over the summer, but we all know that's not true. We're always working and trying to become better at what we do to influence our students. So I purposely left planning last because I think that's where it falls. You have to understand how to think about rigor. And you have to get that in your mind, that it's not more work, it's not more of anything except critical thinking and student interaction and teacher responsiveness. And then you have to understand the assessment, because once you understand the assessment, you can go back and identify what I call the key skills, or what College Board calls the big ideas. All right. There are 5 key big ideas in AP Seminar. So once I know what the big idea skills are, I can work backwards from that point to set up the units. Now there are a couple other things. Delve into your course at a glance. This is located in the course and exam description available on AP Central, but you should have also received one when you went to training, whether that was electronically available to you or whether that was in a binder form. Look at that course at a glance. It's a quick guide to the planning. I have a screenshot of the U.S. history one here. You're seeing each of the units with the major topics, and they're telling you, they're estimating how long this should take. Now, when you first see these units, I think all you can think is, I don't have enough time. And honestly, you probably don't. So that's the first thing to understand. That's okay. Because the cool part about this course at a glance is there are a lot of other overarching skills in each of these periods. So things you could just touch on or that you could elaborate on in another unit. So my advice is focus on the big ideas and combine units with overlapping skills. Now that sounds sort of simple, but I think when you see that binder and it has all of those suggestions and all of those texts or all of those problems or all of those history events, you have to go back to that idea. What is being assessed on the test? Could the DBQ come from anything? It could. So it's possible that you could miss that one moment or whatever. Is it possible even if you did all 10 units? Of course it is. Or that they couldn't retain that because you were moving at too big a pace, too fast a pace. I don't believe in that. I think you have to pick and choose, and the research seems to support this too. You have to pick and choose which skills are essential and which skills you actually need, can sort of put underneath, but maybe not spend so much time on. One of the things that I found really interesting in my planning was on the AP Educator YouTube channel. In each of these videos, experienced teachers, 10 or more, are sharing their tips and tricks on planning and pacing. There's one video for each of the AP test or scores. So I watched all of US history and I watched all of AP Lang. And I can tell you, there's some valuable information to be gained in these YouTube videos. If you're not going to AP Educator, you need to check in there occasionally. Because of COVID last year, many of the videos posted, and especially the year before, were very informative on how to, especially digitally, transfer or communicate with your students about your class and how to plan for it. So I'm hoping that I highly recommend you visit this site, and I actually make my students visit the AP student site where they found some valuable information this week. I don't, let's say, talking about the video kind of daily videos in AP Classroom and these types of videos, you don't have to assign them. Students can just be in charge of their own learning to some degree. I give recommendations. You might want to watch this. And you'd be surprised how many students will go on their own time and watch that. Or if it's something very valuable, I say, okay, tonight I want you to take a quick glance at this, watch you take a few little notes on your note card, and let's discuss it tomorrow. So these are valuable sites that I think we're underusing, and our AP population is underusing. So I was hoping we'd have some key takeaways, and I hope that in this presentation, you've garnered some key takeaways. If nothing else, to really think about how you respond to student ideas. Be careful in that arena. Be respectful. Be encouraging. Let them take the reins and get out of the way a little bit. I think that's a key takeaway. The other one is you have to learn your assessment. Learn it, study it, know it frontwards and backwards, know exactly how it's going to test, how they're going to test, and what they have to know. And finally, take your planning with caution. I don't think you have to get through every single piece per se, every entire, component in AP seminar. You don't have to read every single item they post on AP Daily, or you don't have to do every progress check on AP Classroom. Give yourself a little leeway. Watch them, pick what's most vital, the skills that are most important, highlight them, teach the other ones, but highlight the ones that we know they're going to need to understand and fully comprehend to succeed. As always, if you have any questions, please email me. I'm always available at ataylor@nicewongerfoundation.org. You can set up a Zoom on my email. I would love for you to do that. Join me, ask me a question, set up a Zoom. We'll just chat about a lesson or something you need me to help you locate. I'm available for you. So please don't hesitate to contact me. I so appreciate all of you joining us today. I hope that you learned something valuable in this short presentation. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?